It's, you know.
It's just what about it? Like, he's going through this whole thing, like what to do and stuff. No one's in there. Yeah, like hopefully I want another one like this.
Give me the high sign when you're ready. No pun intended.
Make sure everyone's phones are turned down.
Good evening. I'd like to call this open forum, special meeting, to order. This meeting has been properly advertised in the Home News Tribune according to Public Law 1975, Chapter 231. First, we'll start with a moment of silence and a salute to the flag. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. So this meeting was put on the calendar and advertised for the citizens of Milltown to come and voice their opinions or ask any questions about the sale of cannabis non-binding referendum public question that will be on the ballot on November 6th, 2021. So before we take any comments or
November
questions.
2nd.
I'm sorry?
November
Is
2nd.
that not what I said? I'm sorry.
You're moving to election day. It's fine.
November 2nd. I will turn it over to our borough attorney just to give you a little background on
How we got here?
Exactly.
Awesome. So in November of 2020, at the general election, there was a public question, and New Jersey voters voted in favor of the legalization of marijuana in the state. 67% of voters were in favor of legalization. In February of 2021, the New Jersey legislature and the governor signed into law the Cannabis Regulator, Enforcement, Assistance, and Marketplace Modernization Act. It's a mouthful. And essentially the act was the implementation of the legalization of cannabis, sale, cultivation, distribution, etc. The act also created the Cannabis Regulatory Commission, which was designed to license and regulate the businesses selling medicinal and recreational marijuana within the state. It was tasked with providing regulations for the licensure and operation of the cannabis industry within 6 months of the date of the act, which was in February of 2021. The act further provided for a 6-month period for municipalities to either adopt zoning ordinances permitting or prohibiting various classes of cannabis businesses within a municipality. The act also provided that in the absence of municipal regulation, municipalities will have been deemed to have permit certain classes of businesses in certain zones within a municipality. So in light of the fact that the commission regulations and the timeline for the borough to make a decision regarding permitting businesses within the borough were contemporaneous, the mayor and council decided that they would prohibit cannabis businesses within the borough, subject to revisiting it at a later date after the adoption of the regulations by the commission. In order to ascertain the sentiment of borough residents on the permitting of cannabis businesses within the borough, the mayor and council decided to place a public question on the ballot in this year's election to obtain input concerning the issue from borough residents. The public question was designed to gauge public opinion on the permitting of retail cannabis businesses in an area which would have the least impact on residents, namely the B4 and B5 highway commercial zone, which is located on Riders Lane. In order to permit residents an opportunity to voice their opinions concerning the permitting of cannabis businesses within town, as well as to make inquiries, the borough decided to hold this public forum this evening. The goal is to ascertain the sentiment so that we can revisit the issue of legalization, well, not legalization, but permitting cannabis businesses within the borough at a later date after the public sentiment is gauged, both during the public question as well as this evening. So that's where we are, that's why we're here. I can indicate that I have done my best to become fully familiar with the 170 or 62 pages of cannabis regulations, but I will openly admit that there may be things I don't know the answers to. We do have a council meeting between now and Election Day, and anything I can't offer some insight regarding, I will be happy to provide an answer at our next council meeting.
Thank you. Did the state have something last night to?
The state had a forum. The Cannabis Regulatory Commission had essentially a virtual meeting last night, and it was from 7 to 9, and it was designed more from a business perspective. So it was designed to explain to prospective businesses within the state what the regulations require, what their obligations are going to be, what the set-asides are for some of the initiatives to provide opportunities to communities and individuals who've been aggrieved by, I guess, enforcement of marijuana regulations in the past. So that was really the focus. They did touch somewhat on the ability of a municipality to take certain actions. So essentially, under the regulations, municipalities still have the ability to decide how many of each class of a business are going to be permitted in the borough. So if the borough were inclined to say, we do think that it would be a good idea to permit retail sales along Riders Lane, you could say, well, and we're only going to limit it to one business. So essentially, you would also have the ability to regulate the hours and location, obviously, through zoning regulations. You don't have the ability to regulate the ability of someone in town to order it through a delivery service. Right. So you can prohibit it entirely, but that doesn't necessarily mean that someone within town wouldn't have the ability to obtain it. They would just have to order it through one of the cannabis delivery services, and it would be delivered to them at their home. Okay. You also have the ability to govern normal zoning things like waste disposal, business signage, parking, and the like. You can enact civil penalties for violations, and you would have the ability to prohibit the use of cannabis in public. So essentially right now, smoking and vaping under the law are not permitted. Obviously, there's other delivery systems for cannabis, edibles. You could conceivably say you don't want anyone to have, to be partaking of those in public as well.
Okay, great. So now we'll open it up to the public if they wish to speak, ask questions. Just, we don't have to state the name, maybe we're not doing a name,
No, she should. She should do that. She should just state her name.
We know who you
We
are,
all
but
know
if you want to tell us who you are again.
Yeah. Hi, everyone.
a little more informal tonight.
Sure. So we have Megan Geyer, 29 Highland Drive. First, I'm going to ask how much time I have. Realistically, I think I heard something about a 2-minute limit. Okay, just double checking, because I have a few questions.
Sure.
And some of this we've discussed, I think I know, but I just would like to share in case anybody's watching.
Sure.
So one of the things that I think there's some confusion around is the process of selling cannabis and how that's regulated. So who would actually be able to get access to it if you're recreational, or also the difference between recreational and who would be able to get access for medicinal?
Medicinal are people who have a script from their doctor that allows them to access it through a medical facility. I'm going to openly admit I am not an expert on the cannabis industry or even the regulation of the facilities. Under the normal, under medical, you have to have a condition that allows a doctor to write you a script for it, and I don't know exactly how the process works. Under the new regulations that come out, if you were over 21, you were allowed to go into a facility and purchase it.
Okay. I think maybe some people aren't sure about the 18 versus 21, so it's 21 years old. Yeah, okay.
21 to get in the door. You need to produce, under my understanding from the information session last evening, was that there'll be someone at the door, essentially like walking into a nice club somewhere, where they card you and make sure you're supposed to be there before you can get in. I think there are some provisions for someone to be accompany an adult with them. I don't know that a lot of people are bringing their kids into the cannabis store, but I don't know what the exact regulation of that is, but yeah.
Yep. Yeah, so that's important. I've heard some people who are concerned about whether or not kids would be able to like go in and look around, even if they're not able to purchase, but they can't even enter those facilities.
Nope.
And then there's also a lot about how you can get a business license. And I think the due diligence of how you get a business license and the pretty lengthy process to get it is important for people to understand.
And I'm going to tell you that the licensing of the businesses is something that's handled by the Cannabis Regulatory Commission, so it's not something that I've done a lot of research into, but looking at the quantum of regulations they have and what the standard, I know what the liquor license requirements are. There's going to be a background check. There's a lot of, I guess, information that they want from the operations of the business. You need to have, plans for security you need to have. So I'm assuming that the background checks are going to be similarly thorough.
Yeah, that's something that I gathered from the New Jersey Forum last night too. It looked extremely thorough at the level of, getting a liquor license, possibly even higher levels of scrutiny.
Right. No, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so I just wanted to point out a couple of things, and correct me if I'm wrong on any of these points.
If I can.
If you can. So a few things that I think are important for Milltown. One of the really biggest things is that we can get up to a 2% municipal tax. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So given...
Depending on the nature of I think some of them aren't 2%,
for
but
retail
sales, yes.
Yeah, for retail sales. So just given, I'm stating for, opinion here, given how everybody's always talking about how we can get new businesses in here, how we can get new revenue, how we can get more money to spend on infrastructure, some of the really important needs, that's money that we could be throwing away if we choose not to allow these businesses in our town for whatever reason. Everybody has their opinion. There is also something that's very unique. There's impact zones. Do you know about the impact zones?
I know there are impact zones, but I don't know that we're going to fall into one of the impact zones because the nature of Milltown isn't like...
Yeah, we aren't.
Yeah.
So Milltown itself isn't an impact zone, but so impact zones are basically areas that New Jersey State has decided they want to reinvest funds into in a variety of ways. If you are starting a business or somehow supporting a business in an impact zone, then you get prioritization for a business license.
Right.
Part of that, New Brunswick actually is an impact zone.
Right.
So if there were businesses that open up in Milltown and they do something like employ more than 30% of their workforce from New Brunswick, then they would get a prioritization to get licenses in order to reinvest in those communities around us that need more investments from us. So something else to consider, that those impact zones are, not a lot of people are talking about them, but I think it's really interesting. Our surrounding community is very important to our way of life in Milltown. Few other things around that prioritization is the minority, the women's, the veterans, and people who have been unfairly impacted by drug laws. They also get prioritization for licenses. So that would be a nice way to bring in diversity for businesses in town. The way that it was explained last night is if there are 100 business licenses in the queue, and then a disabled veteran decides that he wants to start up a cannabis business, and he's number 101, he will immediately become number one for prioritization for that license. So there's a lot that we can do for, those sorts of impacted communities if we bring that business into town. And the other point that I just want to emphasize is that, again, they were really hammering home that the municipalities have a ton of power in this. So we can, like you were saying, we can regulate hours, we can regulate signage, we can regulate a large variety of things, the fees that we have in order to apply for a business license in our town. So even if we say that we're going to allow it, we still have a lot of control. I think that's important. Clearly, I am pro bringing these businesses into town, needless to say. But for anybody who's watching or anybody on the council who hasn't been paying as close attention, you have 1,000 different things to pay attention to. Figured I'd let you know. The other area that I am very curious about, and this isn't necessarily related to, well, it isn't about the ballot question, is nothing on the ballot question talks about medical dispensaries or alternative treatment centers. What I have understood is that the new New Jersey regulations don't have any impact on alternative treatment centers and how those are treated. So I know you were waiting, basically you banned both. You banned the medical dispensaries as well as recreational because we weren't sure about the regulations that were coming down. It looks like there's no impact to them. So given we don't have a way to gather public input on the ballot question about medical dispensaries, how does everybody feel about that? What is your plans to address that?
I think that the goal was, the ballot question is kind of like a middle of the road kind of question. So it can be used as to gauge the temperature of the public regarding that specific issue, but obviously if, let's pick a number, let's say 55% of the people are in favor of the ballot question. Well, obviously, subsumed within that would presumably be a medical marijuana facility, which is much more regulated and different from a retail sales facility. Mm-hmm. It's a smaller subset. So I think the idea is that provides a point of information. This evening provides a point of information, and I think the idea for the elected officials was to use all those things to get the information, and then obviously look at what the options were.
Okay. Great.
The ballot question was in reaction to the newer recreational. The medical has been legalized for quite some time. There's been dispensaries around the area for quite a while. So the ballot question was to address the newness and the uncertainty of the new regulations from the state.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's, given the ballot question that's coming out and gathering public sentiment as much as you are, I think it's a good time to revisit us banning medical dispensaries. These alternative treatment centers, it's a matter of disability equality and access to your medication that is prescribed by a doctor, that's licensed by the New Jersey state. Having talked to a lot of the community, I know that there are people who live in Milltown who would be greatly impacted. Their quality of life would be greatly impacted if they were able to walk or very quickly easily get to a place where they can access their medicine. And I just don't want those two to be conflated, because I've seen a lot of people in town have very different opinions about recreational facilities versus medical facilities. Generally what I've heard is everybody's kind of like, let the medical facilities happen. The recreational facilities is a little bit more of a mixed bag. We'll see with the ballot. The only other question that I have for you, you had mentioned that the CRC, the Cannabis Regulation Committee, or Commission, was created in January. Was that created in January or was it expanded? The state one?
I will admit I don't know whether it was expanded or created.
Okay.
So,
the only reason I bring that up is because they're like the official governing
right.
group, and if they're brand new, people might think, they're amateurs. I think that the CRC is the same group that's been regulating medical all along.
I'm not sure it is, because I know that the new chair was recently appointed.
Okay.
So
they may have created a new separate entity.
I think they may have created a new separate entity to create these regulations, because these regulations are separate and distinct, as you indicated, from the medical facilities.
Yeah, they absolutely are. The number of licenses, the business process. So even if Milltown says that they allow one license for a recreational facility, you can still completely separately decide that you want a different number of licenses for alternative treatment centers. So those are totally separate.
And I would merely point out, I'm not sure that Milltown has always banned alternative treatment centers, but frankly, no one's seen fit to cite one here. So yep. I understand. I mean,
even if nobody does.
I mean, they're just, those facilities don't seem to be as prevalent as the other facilities will likely be once this gets up and running in about another 4 months. So.
Yeah, it's possible. I think it's a matter of whether or not we want to allow it in town, and those are all my questions.
Thank you.
Thank
So
you.
while we're on licenses, I've had
Yes, ma'am.
people ask about the licenses. Are there a set finite amount that the state will have, or is it by county? Is it by the state? I mean, is it, you know?
I will admit, I don't know. I can get an answer to that. So
Because
I believe
that
there's
was
going to be a
the
finite
question,
number.
like,
just- I
does
don't-
every
yeah.
town get one, or is it just gonna be like Middlesex County gets 6 and then it would go, so that
Yep.
was something that a few people had inquired about.
Sure.
Okay. Anyone else? Hey, Rich.
Hello, good evening. Rich Revelinsky, 14. I've got, Ms. Geyer is a wealth of knowledge, obviously, but to dumb it down for a few more of us. So she indicated that there was a difference between the dispensaries for recreational versus medical. And Mr. Mignola, you had actually indicated that we can't stop someone from ordering it online anyway, for medical reasons. So I think that access to medication is still available, if I'm not mistaken, or did I misinterpret?
When I said access is available for mail order, it's going to be access available for recreational for mail order. So essentially, if someone had a medical prescription, they can presumably access it the same way, but it may not be the same thing as they would get, because I think the medical grade of things is a little different from what you might get on a recreational basis.
So delivery to the home is still available in both recreational and medical,
I don't know
regardless
if
of whether or
medical
not
is
the
available
public
for
question
delivery.
passes?
I don't know about medical and delivery. I
Okay.
know that recreational, there is a class. I can try to get an answer to that. I know that most of the people who I know who have a medical prescription for it have to go to a dispensary. So I don't know that there has been a mail order process in the past. I don't know if that has been expanded, given the fact that recreational is going to be available by delivery in the future.
And the current ballot question is in regard to recreational only then?
The current ballot question is in regard to recreational retail sales on Riders Lane in the B4 and B5 zone. It has nothing to do with the ability of someone to order it and have it delivered, because the state has seen fit to advise municipalities that they have no ability to regulate that.
And it also has no impact on a medical dispensary? Are they one and the same for recreational, is what the ballot question is on? But
The question's
yet
on
we would not
recreational.
have the ability to stop someone to come in and sell it for medical reasons?
Right now it's not zoned for medical. So
Okay.
the borough is going to need to revisit what it believes is appropriate in light of the new regulations and in light of the information it gained at this forum, as well as the ballot question.
Okay. So actually, the mayor had a really good question too about the licensing applications or actually the number of licenses, and it begs the question, is it going to be regulated similar to the ABC, the number of liquor licenses, where if for some reason the public sentiment changes over time and we say, we had a whole bunch more of these because it's great revenue, would we be able to go back and issue more, or are we going to be limited to whatever we apply for now? Because, Milltown, obviously we have only a handful of liquor licenses, I think, 2 operating really within
Right.
the borough limits at this time, and it kind of burdens businesses from coming in, new restaurants and things. And I for one, am not necessarily pro-recreational. Dispensary in town, I'll make that clear. But, I would hate to see the borough cut off its legs and not have the ability to issue them if public sentiment changed in the future.
It's not, the licensing of the facilities isn't run like alcohol licenses. They aren't location specific. So they're going to be state licenses that people can apply for. So there's going to be a number in the state. I've got to see if they're allocated by county, but right now it's not as if Milltown has the ability to get 2 or Milltown has the ability to get 3. So I don't think it's regulated in that manner like an ABC license.
As well as transferable, like you couldn't just get your license because you applied all this and then go ahead and sell it to someone else.
Yeah, no,
who wants to
it's
still-
not, I don't think they're going to be transferable either. I think you're going to apply for the license and you're going to pay the annual fee associated with the license, but the license isn't going to be something that is a commodity that's going to be traded by the individual businesses.
Okay. Another question that I have is in regards to federal regulation.
Right.
I know when they legalized it in Colorado, I had seen on Vice News that you had basically retired military officers serving as armored car transport because the money was not allowed to be placed in an FDIC bank.
Right.
So is that regulation still apply, and how would that impact our ability to generate the 2% tax benefit by having one in town? Or would we be able to legally according to federal standards, accept those funds and place them into use, or would we have to literally take, a bag full of cash and say, this is what we got?
I'm going to have to look into that, but I dare say that the state of New Jersey has seen fit to tell municipalities that they're entitled to.
I can let you know, there actually are a couple of banks in New Jersey that are dealing with cannabis businesses, and they're starting, they're just state-run banks, so they can deal with the state regulations and not have to worry about the FDIC federal regulations.
Yeah,
So you can work through your normal banking channels.
I didn't know
I-
that
I
until the thing last night. That's what they said last night at the meeting, yeah.
And I guess in conjunction with that then, would those banks, or would we be prohibited as a borough to work with those banks in any form or fashion?
I don't see why we
I'm sure the
would be.
state would have to work that out.
I just, I'd hate for us to say, yes, let's do it, and then all of a sudden, the federal government says, well, by the way, you can't take that money.
That's part of the issue.
I think that would be a really interesting lawsuit between the state of New Jersey and the federal government at some point. 'Cause
You're an attorney, I'm sure you've seen worse.
I've seen all kinds of things, so, but right now, the mechanism the state has seen fit to do is to allow the states to impose the tax, and frankly, the state's gonna be taxing the businesses as well, so, I dare say there's gonna be an ability to get the money, otherwise this whole thing's not gonna work terribly well.
I have another question about some of the regulations. You said basically that we would be able to generate whatever regulations that we wanted to, ordinances or resolutions in regards to how the businesses operate to an extent. And I understand it's a slippery slope when you start regulating them too much, but at the same time, are you able to say employees are not allowed to have a criminal record, or is there anything like that language that can be utilized?
We wouldn't be able to, because there's already regulations that the Cannabis Regulatory Commission has put out regarding the employee background checks and things like that. So that's already vetted by the state, that's already something that they've taken over. So essentially, the municipalities aren't allowed to regulate areas that they've already decided to regulate. So it's issues of federalism, for lack of a better term. If they've decided that they say it's their ability to regulate it, we don't get to step in, so.
Okay.
So-
And lastly, I'd like to point out that out of curiosity, I was in California a few years ago when it first happened. I was in Palm Springs and I walked into one before they really got regulated. And it was walking into jars and plants and all this sort of crazy stuff. And I told my wife, we had traveled out there, I said, you gotta check this out. It's like the Wild West. And we went in and everything was prepackaged with, in just a year time, everything was prepackaged, behind the counter, in glass, and it had, listed the ingredients, the amount of CBD and THC and all that, and it was amazing how far they had come in just a year.
Sure.
That, it went from a free-for-all essentially, and here's your license to more regulated and more run like a professional business. So I think there is hope like that. I don't know where we are in New Jersey in regards to those.
They've got a lot of that.
They've got all that.
One of the licenses is a testing facility lab, and they're gonna test the product. They've got regulations regarding the spoiled product. They've covered pretty much everything soup to nuts.
So
with respect to the
we've
product.
New Jersey's based our information and our guidelines essentially on the success and failures of those who have come before us.
Exactly. I know that when the question was being raised regarding the legalization at the legislative level before the public question, there were a number of legislators who were making trips out to California and Colorado to figure out what was being done correctly and what the problems were, so that if we ever did legalize it, we would know what to do and what not to do.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks. How many states are legalized now? Does anyone know?
I do not.
Megan, do you know?
I don't know, off the top of my head, sorry.
You don't know? We stumped her.
No, because I do recall that when they had an earlier meeting about the cannabis, they said that they had, benchmarked all of Colorado, California, Nevada, the other states that have, and sort of did, a lessons learned, and I'm sure they picked a lot of the regulations from the people that have been working with it already.
And just looking at the regulations, there is a significant amount of security regulations that exist within the regulations adopted by the Cannabis Regulatory Commission regarding cameras and, access and lighting, so that the typical things that we might be concerned with from a municipal level, they have to have a security plan, they have to have an alarm system, they have to have panic buttons, they have to have, things, they've pretty much covered just about anything from a security perspective that you could think of. If there's going to be a power outage and it's going to be more than 8 hours, they have to notify someone at the state level so that they have oversight. So there's a lot of foresight that's gone into the process. I'm really, and looking them over, I'm really excited with how much thought went into the process.
Right.
I can't answer your question though. You want to take mine? Just 2 seconds. So your question about like the maturity of the businesses and it being, 0 to 60 in 1 year. What you'll find in New Jersey is all the medical facilities have been preparing to go into the recreational. So they've been running their operations, they have their testing labs, they have all the security, they have literally everything. And you would think you're going into Fort Knox, going into one of them. And they're probably going to repurpose, there's a couple of them in the state that are already planning to repurpose their facilities to recreational, so mature businesses.
And I will say that that's good to know, because even if Milltown says, no, we don't want it sold here, North Brunswick or East Brunswick could say yes, and it could be right across Riders Lane, or it could be on Route 1. So it's good to know that, close by, it's gonna be fairly strictly regulated and secure.
Very.
And accessible. Even if Milltown were to say no, the likelihood of it being accessible close by, it seems to me, would be very high. One last question that, as I sat down, I thought of is, when Target and Milltown came in, we had a tremendous impact on the needs of the police department within the town. And a lot of that has to do with shoplifting. I think the officers on a regular basis, hearing the report from the other evening, is often and frequent and accounts for a lot of calls. Does the regulations provide any sort of additional impact? I mean, it seems like 2% is great for us, but any other sort of financial compensation, should we have to hire more officers or have more overtime to deal with situations that occur? And I know they're safe, and I know that, I'm just thinking, worst case scenario, so that we're prepared. And
I think the 2% is what you'll get out of it, if they're, which should cover what your additional costs might be, if they exist, because I don't know. Based upon the level of security and regulation they have, it would seem to be someplace that I don't think people are going to want to go and try to do something like that at. There's going to be more scrutiny there than there is in a Target or a,
And this would be 2% of gross profit, or sales, or?
I will find you that answer.
Because, if someone decides that they're going to jack up the rent on the property they own under a bit different name, and they go, look, we're not actually making any money.
Well, they're required.
How much do we get?
Their
there's
price
ways.
required to be stated, and I don't see it and regulated by the state, so it's
Okay,
not something.
so it's actually off of sales and
Yeah.
revenue?
Yeah.
Okay.
The state will always have their hand in their
They're-
pocket.
Yeah,
Wow.
because the state's going to get rid of it.
Yeah. Hi, Randy.
Hello. Randy Ruth, 88 Clay Street. So I keep hearing this 2%. Has anybody looked into projected revenues per business?
Make it us.
All right, so I came up with around $1,000 to $5,000 at a 2% tax within the borough. If you figure the average revenues. Is that accurate?
I just looked at the average revenue across the country, which is going to be vastly varying, obviously, and that was $3 million annually 2 years ago, and the industry has been growing at about 30% per year.
So my figure was based off of what Milltown would actually get per business if it was taxed at 2% off of their revenue. And their revenue on average was like, I think I actually sent it to somebody on the council a while ago. But if it's between like $100,000 or $500,000 and $100,000, it's only $1,000 to $5,000 in taxes for the borough is what I have. So, is that something? It doesn't seem like a whole lot, but it could be. Nobody really knows. So I guess does that number jive with?
I was looking at around 60,000.
Okay.
So if the average business size is, correct me if I'm wrong, my math here is $3 million revenue, then 60,000 would be coming into the, right?
Yep.
Thank you.
Got math.
Right. Good math.
Good math. Okay, so either way, it depends on the size of the business.
It's the unknown.
Right.
Of course.
But the question really is, is there any plan for this revenue? Would it just go into a generic fund? Is it going to be earmarked towards the police, earmarked towards education, the arts, which we have no funding for? Anything? Any ideas?
Not yet.
It's a good question to ask. I don't know that anyone's gotten there yet, because we haven't gotten to the point where anyone's talked about doing it. So I guess until you decide you're going to implement a position where you're going to allow the retail sales, figuring out what you're going to do with the money from them seems to be a little bit ahead of the game. But nonetheless, it's a very good question to ask.
Okay, all right, that's all I have, thanks.
Great.
Very great.
Anyone else? Hey, Courtney.
Hi, everyone. Courtney Williams, 318 Clay. I think it's really important just to take everything a step back and just go over like the exact zoning of the projected or proposed site. So just explaining the B4, B5 zone, why it's specifically that, and if there is any latitude or if there's given any latitude in this kind of law to like expand it or like restrict it.
Well, essentially what happened was, as I indicated at the outset, if the municipalities didn't take any action to prohibit it or regulate it, they were essentially deemed to have allowed it within certain zones within. So your business zones would have been allowed retail sales of cannabis. Your light industrial would have allowed for manufacturing, things like that. So essentially what the borough and a lot of other municipalities have done is they've prohibited it pending the regulations. They can then pull back on the prohibition in small bites or in large bites, depending on what they see fit. So the idea behind the public question was just to gain some public input, not necessarily as a lockstep mechanism for something happening. So the zones were chosen because, the type of license was chosen because retail sales tend to be one of the smaller and least intrusive ways of encountering a cannabis business. The areas that were chosen, the B4 and B5, were chosen because they're the highway commercial districts on the edge of town in an area on a more highly traveled roadway that doesn't bring the businesses within to the center of town where you would be closer to schools and churches and other things that would probably cause people concern. So the idea is to get a temperature of the public for that area with that type of business and then work from there and figure out what might or may not be appropriate based upon that and based upon the outcome of this evening and other input that the elected officials receive. So it's not a lockstep, this is a public question, this is the only thing we're thinking about, we're not going to think about anything else. The idea was we'll pick something that's kind of not that aggressive, but more aggressive than just say, medical facility, and see what kind of feedback you get, because while 67% of residents in the state decided that they thought it would be good to legalize it, that doesn't necessarily mean that that same number thinks that it's a good thing to happen in their backyard. So people might say, it'd be a good thing to have, I'd love to be able to go and buy it, I'd love to have it delivered to my house, but if you think you're putting it in Milltown, you're crazy. Right. So that's really what, this is kind of an idea to get some input from the residents to see whether or not their vote, say, in favor of it or against it, if that's changed based upon putting it here. If that makes sense.
Yeah, perfect. Yep.
Anyone else? So Pete just summed up perfectly some of the sentiment that we had for putting it on the ballot was that if it's legal in the state of New Jersey, some people may be unhappy about that, some people may be happy about it. But really, we want to get some feedback on the ballot for, hey, that's great, just like Pete said, that, it's here, but we don't want it here in our town. So that's what we're looking to hear, get gauge from the public. So, talk to your neighbors, your friends, please vote. That's the most important thing. Vote on November 2nd, mail in your ballot. You can put it in the drop box. There's early voting around Middlesex County, but, we really want to hear what you all have to say. So if there's no other questions, comments, I will close the meeting and thank you all for coming this evening, much appreciated, and we'll look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.